Today we're diving into the latest U.S. Bank Freight Payment Index for Q3 of 2024, where we're seeing a mixed bag in terms of truck shipments and spending across the United States. There still are a lot of challenges going on, but maybe, just maybe, we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. So we're going to break it all down. Let's go. All right, let's start with the big picture. The latest numbers show that truck freight shipments and spending continued to contract, but here's the interesting part. It's happening at a much slower pace than it was earlier this year. So while there's no denying that there's still pressures in the freight market, this slowdown could mean that we're finally nearing a bottom. What does this mean, and how does this look nationally and by each individual region? Let's take a look at the national numbers and kind of what it means. But the National Shipment Index fell by 1.9% last quarter, marking 9 consecutive declines. But it's honestly the smallest gap we've seen and the smallest drop we've seen in over a year. And in that year-over-year basis, shipments are down over 21%. It's one of the biggest decreases on record. Now, in terms of spending, it's a very similar story, unfortunately. The National Spending Index, that dropped by 1.4% in Q2, and it's down 21.3% compared to last year. Now, this trend is partially due to the lower shipment volumes and the falling diesel prices, which have definitely helped keep freight rates, relatively stable. Now, when I say relatively stable, I don't mean that they're good. I'm not saying that in any means. Someone recently talked to me on Reddit saying, "Oh, you're talking about the rates being stable and they're terrible." When I say they're relatively stable, I don't mean that they're good by any means. I just mean that they're not declining or sharply increasing at any particular stage. They're just kind of staying right where they are. They're not increasing or decreasing. Now we're going to jump into some of those regional trends because I think that that's where you see a lot of the variance across the country. So let's kind of dig into those because it is a pretty interesting story. So we're going to start in the West, and we saw a pretty positive trend with shipments of 1.1%, but it's still down, over almost 11% year over year. And spending did jump. That was about 4.4% in the West, largely due to a rebound in the retail imports and kind of a push to replenish inventories ahead of peak season, ahead of holiday season. Now in the Southeast, it's kind of a mixed bag. Shipments dropped by 7.2% quarter over quarter and a steep 28.6% in the year over year category. But here's a small win. Spending was actually up by just about 1%, the first increase since Q1 of 2023. And that is, suggesting that rates are starting to stabilize, even with those lower volumes that we're seeing. Now we're going to dive over to the Midwest, and shipments saw a slight rise by 0.3% from Q2, but they're still down right around 20% year over year. And spending did drop in the Midwest as well, right around 3%, which does reflect still a downward trend in rates, even on some of those volumes. In the Northeast, it's definitely a much more challenging picture as well. Shipments dropped around 2.8% from last quarter and 25% year over year. So spending is down, 2.5% as well. And it's just, the same kind of story we're seeing over and over again. It's just rates are just, it's not getting any better. They're still weak in a lot of these areas. And then the Southeast is kind of the same story, declined by 3% from Q2, down 23% from last year. And then spending also contract around 3.3%. So, it just kind of indicates that these, stable rates but falling volumes are, kind of due to that softer consumer demand and a lot of weaker housing activity that pushes a lot of these volumes and spending in these regions that we just talked about. So what are the key takeaways? While we're seeing some regions with signs of improvement, the truck freight market is still facing a lot of challenges. And that's whether you're a broker, whether you're a carrier, everyone's facing these kind of challenges. And experts believe that any recovery will be still very slow and very steady. So things aren't going to take off like a rocket ship. It's just going to be a very slow and steady uphill battle to get back to some solid rates. And things like, manufacturing output and housing activity aren't bouncing back. I mean, we just saw the PMI, the Purchasers Manufacturers Index, which saw another decrease year over year and quarter over quarter. So things are not stabilizing in terms of that either. But as the overall economy stabilizes, there's still a chance that the freight market could find a more balance and more trajectory to see rates rise, even with some gradual improvements.